At the Wildlife Center, a wild ocelot ready for release suddenly refused to leave because of a kitten. In all his years working with wild animals, Jacob had never seen anything like it. A solitary predator, who should have been eager to return to the jungle, stood frozen at the edge of his enclosure, staring at a tiny, trembling black kitten as though his life depended on it. Why would a wild ocelot risk everything for a creature that wasn't even his own kind? What happened next left even the toughest rescuers speechless. But before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss more incredible animal stories like this one. The sun was just rising over the Costa Rican jungle as Jacob, director of the Selva Verde Wildlife Center, began his rounds. At 42, with a weathered ball cap and sunburnt skin, Jacob looked more like a farmer than a wildlife expert. But he had spent his life healing broken animals and returning them to the wild. Beside him was Miguel, a younger staffer who had worked at the center for only a year. They stopped at the largest enclosure, where an ocelot named Rico was pacing along the mesh. "How's he doing this morning?" Jacob asked, clipboard in hand. "Better than expected," Miguel replied. "His leg wounds healed completely. He's eating, climbing, ready to go back into the jungle. We can probably release him this weekend." Jacob nodded, watching the spotted cat move. Rico had been found 6 months earlier, caught in an illegal snare with a gash deep in his hind leg. They hadn't been sure he would even survive the first night, but he had, and he'd stayed wild through it all, always glaring at humans with sharp, golden eyes, avoiding contact, refusing to eat if anyone stayed too close. Just as a wild cat should. Everything was on track. Until that evening. It was Miguel who opened the gate for a young boy, who came running up to the center's reception building with something wrapped in his t-shirt. "Please, help him," the boy gasped. Inside the shirt was a kitten, no bigger than Miguel's hand, its black fur slick with rain, eyes cloudy, body shivering uncontrollably. "Where'd you find him?" Miguel asked. "By the river," the boy said. "He was crying, and his mother never came back." The kitten, barely 3 weeks old, was hypothermic, weak, and fighting to breathe. Without care, he wouldn't last the night. Jacob shook his head when Miguel brought him into the treatment room. "You know we don't usually take in domestic cats," he muttered. But he still knelt down and gently touched the kitten's damp head. "All right," he sighed. "Let's see what we can do." They placed him on a heating pad, gave him fluids, and started antibiotics. Miguel leaned over the table. "What should we call him?" Jacob thought for a second, then said, "Shadow. Suits him." They set up a small incubator and took turns bottle feeding Shadow through the night. But the next afternoon, everything they thought they knew about animals changed. Miguel was carrying Shadow's incubator down the hall when he passed Rico's enclosure. The ocelot, usually silent and uninterested in anything but his next meal, suddenly bolted to the mesh. His spotted fur bristled, his nose pressed to the wire, and then he made a sound neither man had ever heard before. A low, vibrating hum. Something ocelots only made to their cubs in the wild. Miguel froze. "Jacob," he called. Both men stood there watching as the fierce predator followed the incubator back and forth, his eyes locked on the fragile black kitten inside. "That doesn't make sense," Jacob murmured. "Why would he?" But the longer they stood there, the clearer it became. Rico wasn't trying to hunt the kitten. His body language wasn't predatory. It was protective. They tried moving the kitten away, and Rico growled, pawing at the mesh and letting out a mournful cry. When they moved Shadow closer again, Rico calmed instantly, laying down, pressing himself against the wire, eyes fixed on the tiny creature. That night, Shadow's condition worsened. His tiny chest heaved, and his temperature plummeted. "I don't think he'll make it till morning," Miguel whispered. But then Jacob had an idea. What if we let him stay near Rico? Just close. Enough for the Ocelot to see and smell him. Maybe it comforts him somehow. It was a long shot, but they were out of options. They moved Shadow's incubator just outside Rico's enclosure, and immediately the Ocelot pressed himself against the mesh, purring so deeply it vibrated through the floor. By dawn, the kitten's breathing had steadied. His body was warmer, and for the first time, his tiny mouth opened to take formula. Both men stood there, silent, watching the unlikely pair. Over the next few days, Shadow grew stronger, and Rico refused to eat unless the kitten was nearby. When someone reached into the incubator, Rico would growl a warning, pacing the mesh until the kitten was returned. Jacob finally dug into Rico's intake report again and found something he'd missed. When Rico was rescued, the hiker who found him mentioned a dead female ocelot nearby, likely his mate or companion. Miguel quietly said what they were both thinking. Maybe he lost someone, and now he's protecting this little guy to fill that hole. Release day came anyway. The crate was ready, the papers signed. Rico was sedated and loaded for transport. But as the crate was carried out, Shadow, from across the building, let out a sharp cry. Even half sedated, Rico lunged against the crate door, his golden eyes panicked, ears tuned to the sound. Jacob watched, and then he quietly said, "Stop, we're not doing this." Instead, they called a sanctuary just outside San Jose that cared for unreleasable wildcats. 2 weeks later, both Rico and Shadow were settled there, in a spacious, forested enclosure. When the staff finally allowed Shadow inside Rico's space, the Ocelot lowered his big head, sniffed the kitten, and curled himself protectively around him. Miguel whispered, "Sometimes love doesn't need to make sense," and Jacob nodded. Because in that quiet jungle, beneath the warm sun, a wild ocelot and a fragile black kitten proved that love, no matter how improbable, is the most powerful medicine of all.